Hey, what's up everyone? Adam here with brahwegotthis, and today I want to talk about the number one mistake that I see beginners make in ESO. This is a mistake I have been observing for the last 10 months, and I was actually about to make a video on it way back at the beginning of the year, but I just didn't because there was an update that kind of threw it off. And so when I go into this mistake, I want you all to understand that this topic is something I really want to focus on helping players in 2022 with. I just haven't known how to make the videos to where it was easy to understand and follow. Before we get into that though, I do want to give a shout out to all my patrons. Thank you so much for supporting. I also thank you to my members on YouTube here, and thank you for everyone in the Discord and the Twitch streams. If you'd like to become a patron, check out the link below. If you'd like to become a member, make sure to hit that join button. And if you want to join our Discord or come to the Twitch channel, all those links will be in the description, and you can check out our website at brahwegotthis.com. Thank you all so much. So a lot of you are probably thinking, Adam, is this mistake rushing to the end game? I see a lot of people saying, don't rush, don't do any of that. And to that I say to you, it isn't that per se, but it's actually something I don't think gets talked about at all. I do want to say though, rushing is a mistake that players make, but rushing to the end game actually in turn creates this problem we are going to talk about, and that is new players skipping or neglecting the mid game of ESO. That is the biggest mistake. Now, I want to elaborate why this is the biggest mistake and why I think this is one of the biggest downfalls of new players continually playing ESO. I think this is one of the big reasons you don't see players make it to the end game, or you see players get discouraged and give up, because the mid game is something that isn't really defined or talked about much in ESO. If you play ESO for a decent while, the mid game is where most of your time will really be spent. But what is the actual mid game? This is where it gets really tough and hard to define, which is one reason why I've tried to really think on this topic a while, because as you all know, here in the channel, I do a ton of beginner guides. Those beginner guides help you get off the ground, understand what you're doing, and get you moving towards the harder and more in-depth topics. Then what will happen is a lot of players will then either play a while and make it to the end game, and they will utilize guides from end game players or content creators. However, the amount of players that reach that point, I think, are very small in comparison. A lot of players are still stuck in the beginning stages, either taking their time, which is perfectly fine, and I think you should do, or they are stuck because they can't seem to get over that beginner hump. Players get discouraged for many reasons. A couple of them are, why aren't they hitting DPS numbers? Why are they dying in mechanics? Why doesn't their build seem to work? Here's where you start to see a drop off in players. And the reason for this, I believe, is I think players are trying to go from beginner to immediately in-game builds or in-game type stuff, when in reality, there is a whole section in the middle that you really need to experience and understand first. Think of it this way. Have you ever been to a Subway and they cut your sub, but they do a really bad job of cutting it evenly, and you have a thick bottom side and a thin top? And then all of your stuff that you have, the meat, the sauce, the lettuce, all the vegetables are in the middle there. This is a perfect depiction of how ESO is set up. That thick bottom is the beginner stages of ESO, and you need that foundation to give you a good start. And the sheer volume of content as well is at that thick bottom, because there's so many systems and things to understand as a beginner. The thin top is the top in-game threshold, where it really isn't as thick as you think it would be, and all the stuff in between is what makes up most of the sub. That is the mid game in ESO. If you take all that stuff out of the middle of the sub, you won't be able to have a satisfying end game at the top of the sub, because you have no flavor, no spice, or meat to your arsenal. That metaphor was really interesting, so I hope I didn't lose everyone on that, but that is seriously a good depiction, in my opinion, of how that's made up in ESO. But in all seriousness, this is what ESO is like. You need to learn the foundational beginner things, but then you have so many mid-game systems or things to learn or understand or comprehend that will help you get to your end game. Creators or players that make in-game builds are making that build for players that fully understand that class and role and have the ability to execute that build very well. It doesn't mean that beginner players can't get to that point, but you have to understand these in-game players or creators aren't people that picked up the game 2 weeks ago and are hitting 90k DPS or are tanking vet trials. They have been playing, studying, and testing the game for a long time, which is why if you are a new player and you have reached CP 160 or maybe CP 200, even though you may have all the item sets that you need, that they say you need, right? You still aren't hitting what they are, most likely. And so why is that? Why do you think that that happens? Well, let's get into what the meat of the mid game is. The first thing is having all of your passives. Passives help you immeasurably, and at CP 160 and CP 200, you probably don't have all the passives in your build, especially if you did what people said not to do, and that was power level to CP 160. This is why so many players tell you not to rush, because you're going to miss skill points. You're going to need skill points. There are a lot of ways to get skill points. You can get them through questing, which is a great one because there's so many quests in the game, but you can also get these by doing quests in dungeons, group event in public dungeons, and other ways. But passives will help you have more resources. They will help you have more sustain. They will help you have more damage and resistances. If you look here on my Dragon Knight, I'm just going to go through a few passives. I've done this before in other videos, but just look at some passives here that are just so crucial. Combustion. Increase the damage of your burning and poison status effects by 50%. That's an increased damage boost of 50% to our burning status effects. Dragon Knights are all about fire and poison, okay? This also, when you apply burning to an enemy, you restore 1,000 magicka. When you apply poison to an enemy, you restore 1,000 stamina. This is something that helps your sustain. It helps you do more damage. It helps you be able to use your skills more, okay? World and Ruin. Increase the damage of your flame and poison attacks by 5%. That's just a 5% flat damage buff right there. These are just two examples of why passives are so important. And the thing is if you don't have these passives, you're not going to be having as many resources, you're not going to be doing as much damage, and they really do help. Another massive part of the mid game is champion points. I always talk about how CP level doesn't dictate skill, and it doesn't. But having 700 more champion points is going to be beneficial. You're going to get a lot of help in free damage or resistances, you could say, from having that CP. A quick example again of this, okay, is we have over 200 CP in these stars right here, okay? And this is giving us a 10% damage done with damage over time effects. This is giving us a 10% more damage done with single target effects. This is giving us 10% more damage done with area effect attacks. This is giving us 10% critical damage and critical healing. If you do not have some of these stars, if you do not have that CP, that's gonna definitely show up when you're doing things. So CP does matter. It's just, if you see someone with 1,000 CP, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're the best player in the world, but it still is going to help over time. So this is a massive part, and that's why as well is if you keep grinding CP levels, you can also burn out in this game because there's so many. So take your time with it, but understand that that is a big part of the mid game. And now to get to the two biggest reasons why the mid game is not understood or skipped. And the first one is armor sets. Armor sets play a massive role in your ability to succeed in this game if you don't know what you're using or if you aren't using sets to your advantage. There are significantly easier to use and more powerful item sets for less experienced players. We are going to look at a few item sets and break down why mid-game players should look to possibly different sets when making their journey to the end game if they are struggling. I like to categorize item sets into three different names. Those are static sets, Proc Sets, and Proc Sets with homework. Static sets are flat sets that require no attention to use, but they are directly correlated to your proficiency level or expertise to get the most out of them. So an example of a static set is Mother Sorrow. This gives max magicka and gives a ton of critical chance. Another one would be Leviathan. The reason this is a static set and it correlates to your proficiency is this is going to give you a flat critical boost, obviously. So you're not getting any sort of proc damage or anything like that, right? But this is going to augment your build as much as you can utilize your build, if that makes any sense. So say you aren't weaving your skills well, or you aren't using your skills at the right time, or you're not light attacking a lot, that crit chance isn't going to have as much impact because you're not necessarily as proficient, right? So this is very, very based off of how well you perform your build, okay? Now, it doesn't mean that it still doesn't help. It does help, right? That extra crit chance is gonna still be nice because when you do hit your skill right, you're probably gonna crit more often, right? But just keep in mind that this is based off of how well you do in a lot of situations. Proc sets are sets that need specific conditions to proc the set. And once that set procs, they give added bonuses, damage, or other goodies. These can be sets that proc almost all the time, or sets that take a significant thing to proc that is difficult. And that we will get into what that is in a second. But as you see here, Overwhelming is, in my opinion, a very good Magicka-based beginner proc set. If you see here, this is going to give you some flat bonuses, which are weapon and spell damage and max Magicka. But if you look at the 5-item bonus, when you deal damage with a class ability, you surround yourself with a torrent that deals 459 shock damage. That number can go up depending on what you're using. Within 8 meters of you every 1 second for 6 seconds. 15% of the damage you deal this way is restored to you as Magicka. This effect can occur once every 7 seconds, and it scales off your weapon or spell damage. This ability is going to proc every 7 seconds, okay? It does not have a proc chance. It says when you deal damage with a class ability. Class abilities are anything in your class that are in these 3 trees right here. Most of your builds, especially Magicka, are going to use class abilities. So this set is very, very easy to proc because you're going to proc it no matter what. So the thing I want you to understand with proc sets and why these are so important to mid-game players is if, say, you are just not doing your build well, or you're just not weaving well, or you're just not, doing perfect attack weaving, right? All that stuff. Overwhelming is going to be a fantastic set for beginners going to mid-game because this is going to be so easy to utilize. Even if you're hitting your class ability every now and then, or you're not hitting it as much, when you do, you're going to get that bonus shock damage, and 15% of that is going to be restored as Magicka, which then allows you to sustain more, right? That gives you more Magicka, which allows you to use your abilities more. So say you're spamming your abilities at the wrong time, you're still going to get some Magicka back from this. This is why these kind of item sets you need to look out for if you're trying to progress into the end game. These are great middle of the road sets that can get you and help you get to that end game. Now, there's a lot of other things that get you to that end game, but this is something that you can utilize more than maybe something that is giving a flat bonus. Now, you can pair this with an item set that gives you a flat bonus like Mother Sorrow, but if you're only using like flat bonus sets, it might not be giving you as much damage, or it might not be doing as well for you if you're not utilizing those to the best of your ability. And I want to be clear here, I'm not saying this is going to make you do 70k DPS, but what I'm saying is that you need to find sets that you can utilize to the best of their potential, right? And once you feel like you've gotten better and your skill has gotten better, you can start really feeling more confident in using other sets. Okay, let's get into the last item set category that I like to call proc sets with homework. These are more advanced proc sets that require you to meet certain conditions, and then you have to pay attention to other parts of the set probably, or usually, to continue the effect or get the most out of it. The best one that I can always think of or say is definitely harder to use for some players is Reliquin. This is an item set in Cloud Rest, and this was a stamina set that a lot of people used back in the day. I think it's still used pretty frequently now, but this item set, you'll see that it gives you some flat bonuses. You see the 5-piece bonus. Your light and heavy attacks apply stack of harmful winds to your target for 5 seconds. Harmful winds deal 174 physical damage per stack every 1 second. This effect can stack once every half second up to 10 times and scale off of the higher of your weapon or spell damage. This set is directly related to how well you can light attack and heavy attack. If you're not light and heavy attacking well, you're not going to be able to get the full effect out of this set, which is why I call this Proc Sets with homework, because you actually have to think about what you are doing. Now, this set can be very, very good for you if you have your light and heavy attacks down, because you're not thinking about your light and heavy attacks. But say you're a beginner player and you're trying to get into that mid tier, that mid game. If you're struggling to do a rotation, then you're probably struggling to keep your light and heavy attacks up. So instead of using something like Reliquin, right? Say this was like a Magicka set, right? Instead of using something like that and you used Overwhelming instead, this is something that requires way less thought. And so what you can do is you can actually think about, okay, I'm going to focus on my rotation right now. I don't have to really think so much about my light attacks. Yes, it's going to help me. It's going to help me do more damage and stuff. But I'm going to think about just my rotation, and it helps you break down to be able to take it one step at a time. But what I see a lot of players doing is they see a lot of in-game builds at CP 160, CP 200, and they emulate those builds. And some players have success, some players don't. But I think a lot of players get discouraged because they're like, why am I not hitting those numbers? Okay, partly some of that is because those item sets that you're using, you probably are not fully utilizing yet, right? But some of it is going to be the last thing that I'm going to talk about. And that is, you need to understand the build and class, and you have to play it, and you have to practice it. And I'm not saying you have to sit there 7 hours a day and do light attack weaving, but you need to play it, okay? And you need to honestly just progress through the game. This takes everything that we just talked about and puts it together. Understanding your build and practicing it and playing it is key to getting through the mid game and setting yourself up for in-game hard activities. I've had a lot of players come into my stream that said, hey Adam, I'm only hitting like 23k DPS on this build. I don't understand why. And a lot of times they're like, I've got my passives, I've got, my CP's not that high, but like, I've got the item sets, my passives, my enchants, all that stuff, right? And I say like, just keep playing the build, or other people say like, keep playing the build, practice it. And I've had players come back before and I've seen them say that, if I remember correctly, that they've improved. They've went up 15k, 20k DPS. And what that is that's a product of them continually playing that class. And I think a lot of players, again, like I said, they see an in-game build that content creators have, and they're like, I can hit that immediately. And that is just not the reality with it, okay? Those content creators, those players have played those builds, have studied them, have tested them, and they are very good at them, right? Think about this. You take a player that makes their own build that's not meta, and they've been playing it for 5 years, versus someone who's emulating a meta build that they've played for only a month to 2 months. The player that knows their build the best most likely will be able to clear harder content with more ease than the player that's only played for a month and a half. That's not always the case. You have to understand why things in your build are in your build. This could be skills, passives, CP, enchants. This could be knowing mechanics of fights and knowing what to use from your skill bar in a fight. So say you're in a dungeon and a boss drops an AoE completely around him. Like say this is the boss and he drops it completely around him, and you're using a build that's single target damage that has a lot of melee. Well, a lot of times you can't just stand in that, especially if it's in veteran content. You could, if the healer's like, the healer and they're able to heal you out of it, but a lot of times you need to back up. So what you could do is figure out what skills in your bar are ranged abilities. If you don't have any, then you're gonna have to probably tough it out into the damage. But knowing those kind of situations are important, right? Knowing that you can't spam certain abilities, right? Like knowing what abilities on your bar are not spammable skills. Like Eruption is not a spammable skill. Barb Trapped is not a spammable skill. Spammable skills could be, Force Pulse, could be Burning Embers if you wanted it to. Like, there's a lot of skills that are not spammable skills that drain your resources. So it's all of those things put together along with practicing that allows you to continually be successful through the mid game. All of this allows you to become a better player, and it allows you to utilize your build to the fullest. I really am going to try my hardest next year to focus a lot on guides on mid-game related things if I can. I think that a lot of players are in that sort of no man's land and really need direction. So to make sure you don't miss any of that, make sure you like, subscribe, heavy attack that bell icon to stay up to date on all the content here in the channel, because I'm going to try to have guides that are focused more on mid-game players. I really hope that this helped you guys out. I really hope that it helps you open your eyes and see, like, you know, maybe why you're struggling or why this is something that maybe you've been neglecting. But I'm serious when I say that the mid game is a huge part of ESO that I just don't think people really understand and talk about. So again, look out for those videos that I'm going to be making next year, and I hope this video did help you all out. But until next time, y'all, just remember to have faith, be great, and I'll see you on ESO.